this representative thinks is credible for the people to understand, then, you know, we are not citizens anymore. We are merely subjects. And that's not what we're supposed to be in a democracy. We're supposed to be citizens here. So, so that's kind of where I think we're at. You might ask, you know, what's behind the attack on science, which is something I've asked myself. It's an easier question to answer locally here in Wisconsin, because behind the attack on science is an effort to please their corporate donors. There's a sick symbiosis in Madison. Not among the funky progressives in Madison, but among the Walker wrecking crew. And the sick symbiosis is simply this, that to get elected, Walker and Fitzgerald and Voss and people like that have sold their souls to the Koch brothers and John Menard and Diane Hendricks and Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, the biggest lobbyist in the state and the biggest contributor to campaigns. And so they get their money, and when they're in power, then they deliver for Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce and Diane Hendricks and John Menard. It's pretty much as simple as that. Remember Diane Hendricks? I don't know how many people saw the movie on Janesville, As Goes Janesville. Well, there's, or you may have seen this on YouTube, there's this famous interchange between Diane Hendricks, who's the richest woman in Wisconsin. She runs ABC Supply out of Beloit. And she goes up to Walker. This is after Walker's gotten elected, but before he's dropped the bomb. In fact, before he's been sworn in, I think. And she says, when are you going to turn Wisconsin into a red state? When are you going to turn Wisconsin into a right-to-work state? And what does Walker respond, infamously? First, we're going to divide and conquer. And so he did divide and conquer. He went after public sector unions. He won there, and then he did right-to-work, even though he said he had no interest in right-to-work. It's not going to come to my desk. As soon as he got on his desk, he got out his pen, he signed the sucker. So he delivered for Diane Hendricks exactly what she wanted. And Diane Hendricks is his biggest donor. She's given him more than $500,000, and she gave his presidential PAC $5 million. That's how the system works right now. And the Koch brothers are huge supporters. Americans for Prosperity, they have chapters all over the state. They may have a chapter here for all I know. But that's a Koch brothers outfit. The Koch brothers, a fossil fuel company, and with a very right-wing ideology. In fact, David Koch, one of the Koch brothers, ran for vice president on the Libertarian Party ticket in 1980. And here's an exercise you could do at home if you want some homework. Look up the Libertarian platform of 1980. It's virtually identical to the Republican platform of 2016. So, you know, that's who they work for. So if climate change isn't something the Koch brothers like, or Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce like, we're going to say there's no such thing as climate change. It's really almost as simple as that. So.
Did you say 1980?
1980, yeah. And there's a real problem with democracy here in Wisconsin. This is what I work on day in and day out, issues of democracy. There have been terribly undemocratic things that have happened here. The gerrymandering has been in the news a lot because of the U.S. Supreme Court case on redistricting on these fair maps. But just as a quick reminder, what happened in 2011, when the Republicans took power. After the census in 2010, whoever is in the legislature is required by our state constitution to redraw the maps. This is a public obligation. It's part of their public job. Did they do the public work in the Capitol? No, they went across the street to the Glass Bank in Madison, in the pricey offices of the law firm Michael Best and Friedrich, in a locked room that became known as the map room. And the public wasn't allowed in, the media wasn't allowed in, Democrats weren't allowed in, even Republican legislators who weren't in leadership weren't allowed into the map room. They had to ask a staffer, one of Fitzgerald's staffers, to get a key to get in the door of the map room to see the redistricting of their own district. And once they were allowed in, before they left, they had to sign an oath of secrecy. They couldn't tell anyone about it. That's doing the public business in private. And what happened in the map room was that the Republicans had hired some sophisticated computer specialists and scholars about how to redraw the maps in ways that would give the Republicans a huge advantage. And they had like 8 or 9 incarnations of maps, with every different map drawn, giving the Republicans, predicting a higher percentage of Republican victories if they could, cram as many Democrats as possible into as few districts as possible, or spread out Democrats from close districts so that once they kick those Democrats out of those districts, Republicans would have a majority. And that's exactly what happened. They picked one of the maps that would give them the most advantage, and they were successful. Even in 2012, the first election with the maps, even though they didn't get a majority of the votes, they only got 48% of the total aggregate votes for the assembly. They got 60 of the 99 seats. And so they wired it, and that this is a question that the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments on, this month, and they'll decide in June at the latest whether those maps are kosher or not. And I think there's a good chance that those maps are going to be thrown out. But that was one of the first anti-democratic
Yeah,
things
they
did.
won't get new maps drawn before the 2018.
It's unlikely that there'll be new maps drawn before the 2018 election.
That's all.
But by 2020, they would.
I mean, they could if they wanted to, but.
Well, there was a mandate, wasn't it? They were
Yeah,
they were required to do it before
I was at
2018.
the
but
trial. It
that
was a
went away.
fascinating court case, actually. I was at the trial in the Blue Federal Building in Madison, and the good guys put on an incredible case, actually. And the closing argument was something straight out of Gregory Peck at To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, it was the weekend of Memorial Day, and the lawyer got up and said, people died for one person, one vote, and we've got to honor the troops who died for this principle. And then Schimmel's young attorney came up to give his response, and it was one of the most pathetic, weakest lawyerly efforts I've ever seen. He started off by saying, I should be in Door County right now. My wife and I were going to be vacationing in Door County, and now whenever I think of Door County, all I can think about is, what district is Door County in? And it's just like, wow, man, that's all you got? And so, anyway, it was good for us.
How old was he?
I think he was about 24. I don't know. He didn't do a great job, though. So that was one thing, Jeremy. Then they dismantled the Government Accountability Board. The Government Accountability Board was a model, a national model for nonpartisan overseeing of ethics in elections law. They did too good a job, so they got rid of that. And then the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which is funded by the same people that put Walker, Fitzgerald, and Voss in power, they threw out the John Doe investigation of Scott Walker. The 4 conservative justices at the time in the Wisconsin Supreme Court benefited by the expenditure of more than $8 million by Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce and Wisconsin Club for Growth and a couple other of the groups that were the same groups that were under investigation by the John Doe prosecutor. And the corrupt Wisconsin Supreme Court majority threw it out. And then the legislators passed a law getting rid of the John Doe prosecutor for one select group of people in Wisconsin from here on out, legislators, elected officials. Everyone here can be subject to a John Doe prosecutor, but not if you're an elected official. And then, of course, they had the voter ID law, which was intentionally aimed at disenfranchising minorities and young people especially. Dale Schultz, as chief of staff at the time, heard Republican state senators being giddy. This was his quote, being giddy right after the vote, because they knew that it would hurt the ability of minorities and students to be able to vote. And then they rewrote horribly the campaign finance law in November 2015. I was in the Senate gallery at about 10:30 at night. I was the only person there except for a Capitol police officer and a 21-year-old page. And they just destroyed our campaign finance law, which was beautiful. And it had a great preamble about how important clean and open government is, how the citizen's voice should not be drowned out by money. They got rid of the rhetoric, and then they changed the substance. They changed the substance so that the rich people could have ever more influence than they have now. I mean, it's amazing. Before the law was changed, I thought it was grotesque that the richest people in Wisconsin could give $10,000 to their favorite candidate for governor, because who can write a check for $10,000? But now you can write a check for $20,000 to your favorite candidate for governor. Rich and poor alike in Wisconsin can write checks for $20,000 to their favorite candidate for governor. And for the first time in more than 100 years, this was a direct assault on the progressive tradition. Corporations can give directly to political parties now in Wisconsin. Unbelievable, but corporations can and now are doing, giving money to political parties. So these are attacks on democracy. The attacks on local control, which may be pressing in areas like this. And pressing all over the state when counties are trying to stop these CAFOs from coming in. Like Ashland County's been fighting this Iowa pig farmer who wants to bring in a CAFO of 9,000 pigs, you know, within a spit and a high wind to Lake Superior. They succeeded so far. I'm worried that the legislature is going to pass something that says counties can't do that anymore. Everything, you know, everything's got to go through them at the state. And this is the party that was the party of local control. More than 130 laws have been passed that have restricted local control. I was at the Capitol earlier this week, and Senator Wirch, a Democratic senator, was talking about something that he was opposing because it was an assault on local control, and he said, you know, why even run? He used to be on the county board. I can't remember which county he's from, I'm sorry, but he was on the county board. He said, why should people even run for county board anymore? If everything we do at the county level is going to be usurped by the legislature. So, you know, that's a serious problem. We have similar problems in Congress, most notably and grotesquely the NRA's power, even after Las Vegas. You know, it's because of their money and their influence that they're able to do something that, you know, 90% or 95% of the American public don't want. And that's not democracy in action. We don't have democracy in action in Washington or in Madison. Jimmy Carter said about a year and a half ago on Tom Hartman's progressive radio show that we don't have a democracy in America anymore. His direct quote is, we now have an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery. Unlimited political bribery. We tried to expose the political bribery in Wisconsin at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. Our website is WDC.org. And every day we put up stuff on that, and you can see, you know, which legislator is getting the most money from whom, and all that kind of stuff. But it's pretty blatant. So but I'm not terribly. I'm excited about one thing on the money in politics. Well, two things. One, the redistricting thing is going well, but Wisconsin is second only to Massachusetts in the number of communities that have signed on to a resolution saying that we want to amend the U.S. Constitution to proclaim once and for all that corporations aren't persons and money isn't speech. This is a way to overturn the Citizens United decision of 2010 that said corporations can spend absolutely as much money as they want to elect this candidate or trash that. But it's not just the Citizens United thing. Citizens United is kind of a shorthand. But this doctrine of corporate personhood, it goes back to 1888 in a Supreme Court decision called Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railway, where the Supreme Court said that corporations were persons, in a footnote of all things. And then the court after that, you know, well, it's precedent. They said it, even if it was in a footnote, it's still precedent, so corporations are persons. And it's just a crazy.
Precedent.
That's the precedent, yeah. So the idea that corporations are persons, and then the idea is from 1888, and then that money is speech, which is from 1976 in Buckley versus Vallejo, another Supreme Court decision. Those two combined are making it almost impossible for the democracy to function, because our voices as citizens just can be totally drowned out. You know, ExxonMobil makes $10 billion a quarter. It can, you know, run ads against Tammy Baldwin night and day and take her out if they wanted to. So, and our voices wouldn't stand a chance. So that's why we've got to really get at the problem of corporate personhood and amend the Constitution. And I think we should amend the Constitution not in this Article 5 way. Article 5 is part of the Constitution that says there are two ways to amend the Constitution. One is the old-fashioned way. You go to Congress, you get 2/3 approval, then you go to the states and you get 3/4. The shorthand article, the other way is to have a constitutional convention, have 2/3 of the states call for a constitutional convention. And a lot of state Republicans want to do that. Here in Wisconsin and in other states, 28 states have already passed that for a balanced budget amendment, which is crazy on economic grounds, because if there was a balanced budget amendment in 1934, we never would have gotten out of the Great Depression, and if there was a balanced budget amendment when Obama took office, we'd be in a Great Depression right now. So anyway, just that's an aside. Go ahead.
I just wondered if you could comment briefly on how certain amount of evidence suggests that if we do go and try and rewrite the Constitution, that there are actually many options in place to further degrade the Constitution in the process of rewriting it.
Well, that's the fundamental problem with going to so-called Article 5, right, the state constitutional conventions. Because if there's a constitutional convention, it could be a runaway, it just could go all over the place. And even the most conservative justice on the US Supreme Court in the last 100 years, maybe Antonin Scalia, was opposed to it for that reason, because he said once it gets started, you don't know where it's gonna go. First Amendment protections could go, some gun people are worried about the Second Amendment going, gay marriage could go, abortion rights could go, the 14th Amendment, equal protection could go, the whole thing could be rewritten top to bottom. So that's the major problem with that Article 5 route. There are some good people, I gotta add, though, who are for amending the Constitution on corporate personhood, who still wanna go this, who would argue with me and you on this and say, you're exaggerating. I don't think we're exaggerating, but there are some decent people who disagree on that.
Well, the only precedent we have is when they threw out the original Constitution of this country, the Articles of Confederation, and replaced it with the Constitution we have now. So that's exactly what happened.
Right. So, I mean, that's the precedent that's not encouraging.
I guess I was just under the impression that there were a whole long list of changes that would be in place to come down the pike that would perhaps not help the general public.
Well, that's a
as a contingency plan for that.
Right, no, I mean, and that's a concern. I just want to briefly say why I'm not running a hot bath and pulling out a razor blade. And that is because, that's because there's a lot of resistance. I've been, first of all, in Wisconsin, I'm very encouraged. I'm encouraged because I am working with great people in this progressive nonprofit sector. And that everybody is on the same page and everyone is working together. I'm chairman of the board of an umbrella group called Wisconsin Voices, which now has 55 nonprofit organizations in it. And it's not just a paper coalition. We work together organically and regularly. Every other Friday at 11 o'clock, we have conference calls with the people who are working, for instance, in this democracy, clean government sector. So I'm on a phone call with League of Women Voters and Common Cause and Citizen Action, actually ACLU, Planned Parenthood's on sometimes. We're all, and we say, what are the bills coming up that are dangerous? What can we do about them? Who's going to write the press release? Who's going to write the op-ed? Is there going to be a protest? Who's going to organize the protest? In fact, on this redistricting issue, a lot of the reason this redistricting issue has taken off, aside from the Supreme Court case, which is a huge part of it, is that Wisconsin Voices and this coalition was involved in an effort, very successful effort over the last year to get counties to pass resolutions saying they want nonpartisan redistricting. 22 counties just in the last 9 months have passed resolutions saying they want to have nonpartisan redistricting. Pass a law in Wisconsin that says, regardless of how the US Supreme Court rules, we're going to have nonpartisan redistricting. Whether Democrats are in power or Republicans in power, there's no reason why that party in power should be able to distort the map so that they get an advantage. And this isn't a hard puzzle to solve. Iowa solved the puzzle more than 35 years ago. In Iowa, they have nonpartisan redistricting where career civil servants with very specific objective criteria that disallows them, prohibits them from using demographic data about people's political leanings, they draw the maps. And then they have public hearings around the maps. And then the legislature approves them. And it's been working great in Iowa. If it works great in Iowa, it can work here in Wisconsin. So this coalition, though, got together and helped push these counties to, these 22 counties, to, in the last 9 months, to pass that. A total of 30 counties have passed it. And then the Wisconsin Counties Association met in Wisconsin Dells last month and passed a resolution that the Counties Association as a whole is in favor of nonpartisan redistricting. So there's a lot of momentum on the redistricting issue. There's momentum on amending the Constitution. And there's another generation or two behind me who are working in this nonprofit sector and have a lot of energy and enthusiasm and intelligence and early wisdom about how we're gonna turn this state around. And the fact that we're all working together is really encouraging, and we're ahead of a lot of other states. I've gone to some conferences outside of Wisconsin, and, you know, the people are fighting from their own state who are around the table. And we really have shelved our egos, and, you know, everyone says everyone's in a silo. Everyone's not in a silo in Wisconsin. It's not like the environmentalists are here, the civil liberties people are here, and the labor people are here, and the clean government people are here. We're all working together. And this isn't something that's reported on very much, but it's happening, and it's a promising development. I mean, I do think there needs to be I think others in the progressive field need to get their act together, shall we say, and similarly row in the same direction, because I think part of the problem is, first of all, there's just too much bickering. I'm so sick of bickering. Can I just say that if I see another Hillary Bernie debate on Facebook, I am just going to throw the machine out the window. Because and actually, I am not going to have a party at my house anymore if people bring it up, because I wanted to leave my own home over the last 18 months because I have friends who were super Bernie people and friends who were super Hillary people, and they were screaming at each other, and that is just not helpful at all. But anyway, there's a lot of resistance. There's resistance, we saw the resistance to Trump nationally the day after he got inaugurated with the tremendous Women's March in Washington, and there are all marches all over the country. I was in Madison with 75,000 other people. I was outside the Library Mall there. We barely could move. There were so many people there. We couldn't move for about an hour and a half. And the spirit there was uplifting too. First of all, it was 80 to 85% women, and a lot of young women there. And great costumes and posters and great cheers and chants. One was, we don't want your little hands anywhere near our underpants. And, it's that kind of defiance that is very encouraging. And there's the immigrant rights rallies when Trump came down with the Muslim ban. People went to the airports, went to JFK and LaGuardia. My daughter lives in Brooklyn, and she ran out there, and there were hundreds of people there, and people at O'Hare, and there have been immigrant protests ever since. There were a lot of immigrant rights defenders in Madison yesterday for the sanctuary bill. I mean, that's a strong group. And there are dairy farmers here in Wisconsin who know they need the immigrant labor too. And a lot of those folks voted for Trump, and now aren't so happy that they voted for Trump. There was the March for Science in Washington, and all across the country. In Madison, there were 3,000 scientists who walked quite a ways and into the Library Mall. I met them at the Library Mall, and there were these great signs there. There is no Planet B. Though I have a problem with that slogan, because a lot of these super rich folks who have all the power, they don't live on Planet A. They don't live on the same planet we live on, really. They don't need anything public. They can. They don't need a public park. They don't need they own a public park. They own a private park. They don't need a library. They can buy every book under the sun. They don't need public transportation. They have a chauffeur. They don't need a public airport practically. So, but other nice slogans: science, not silence. The oceans are rising, and so are we. And then there were some funny ones too, like the one from the Women's March. There's no cure yet for small hands disease, but if there is, scientists will find it. And then here's one I like a lot, because Trump says he's got he's the smartest guy, he's got the highest IQ, and then his gut, he's got a great gut, he goes by instinct. And so this one was, I trust science-based decisions because my gut only knows shit. So anyway, it's that kind of spirit that is going to get us through. And also, I studied fascism in college. I studied fascism when I was at the Progressive, and I studied fascism as Trump came to power. And the moral of that story, to the extent that I grabbed it, was that there needs to be resistance, and there needs to be nonviolent resistance right away. And civil society can't collapse. Because in Italy and in Germany, civil society collapsed. It collapsed, one, because there was a lot of repression right off the bat, and number two is because people kind of rolled over. And people aren't rolling over. People are in the streets, and the institutions aren't rolling over. The judges are standing up. Mainstream corporate media is standing up to Trump. And conservatives are standing up to Trump, you know, Morning Joe and George Will and David Brooks and Senator Corker and Senator McCain. I mean, it's not like people are just rolling over and playing dead here and letting the guy, you know, go to town. And so those are positive signs. I mean, it's easy to focus and dwell on, holy cow, how bad things are. But I think we need to remember that, you know, first of all, it's not a fascist country yet. If it was, you know, I'd be arrested the second I walked out the door, and you might be too. So, you know, we're not there yet. And people are fighting back, and I think, you know, I don't think he's gonna get away with it. You know, there's a chance that, here's a fantasy, you know, Ivanka's gonna wake up one day and say, and go talk to her dad and say, look, you're not having fun here. This job isn't a lot of fun for you. You're 70, however old you are. You want to golf every day. You're only able to golf on weekends now. You know, you've declared bankruptcy several times before, and yeah, it was a little embarrassing at first, but you got over it. This is like declaring bankruptcy. Just resign and get on with your life. And so that's possible. I mean, it's also possible that he, you know, he could be impeached if Democrats get hold of the House. Certainly, there's plenty of grounds for impeachment, and I don't think Paul Ryan is ever going to do that. But if there's a change in who controls the House of Representatives, I would imagine the next week there'd be a bill of impeachment that was presented. So there are reasons for hope. So I can take questions.
I wanted to ask you your opinion on, one of the things you didn't mention was education, public education, as being eroded. Especially, I mean, I'm aware of it in this state. I can't say about other states. But that seemed to be one of Walker's first targets, that he wanted to get rid of public education. And I think that is one of the things that makes democracy possible, is when people, as they're growing up, are, you know, educated about it, and not having all these, you know,
Educated together.
Yeah,
We wanted to destroy the unions.
I totally agree with you on public education. I did mention it as far as an attack on science, that he's siphoning money off from the public schools and sending it to parochial schools. But I do think, well, let's look. I mean, he's gotten a ton of money from the private school voucher lobby. And do you know who the biggest lobbyist is for American Federation for Children, which is Betsy DeVos's pro-voucher group? It's none other than Scott Jensen, the formerly disgraced Speaker of the Assembly, who is the chief person for American Federation for Children in the Capitol in Madison, who's probably as powerful today as he was when he was Speaker of the Assembly, because he has tremendous amount of money at his beck and call from American Federation, from Betsy DeVos and their billionaire family. And he throws that money in a very sophisticated way at people like Mandy Wright or other good Democrats who are in narrow districts, and he slimes them 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 10 days before the election, and knocks those people off. And the ads don't talk about education, they just assassinate the person's character. And I do think, you know, this is intentional, and it's very detrimental. My wife was a school nurse for many years. We're big public school supporters, and the public school is the only way that a lot of people get a decent chance in this country. And also, public schools are the center of communities, and they're destroying communities by destroying the public schools. So,
is there something that can be done beyond just, I don't know what can be done. I mean, people are electing to send their children to non-public schools.
well, I still think public schools are the promise that we have to our children, and that we need to defend the public schools, and so we need to elect people who are going to support public schools.
About education though, I mean, not to go against what you're saying, I totally agree that we should support the public schools, but public schools as they are now, they don't support education as they are now, even without the more funds that they can get. The fact that there are state mandated reports, that alone, that's done by not educators. So I can understand how people would like to send their kids somewhere else.
Well, it depends on the public schools. My experience is putting 3 kids through the public schools in Madison. And those public schools did a really good job. And I think they got a better education and a better real-life experience than had they gone to private schools.
I think it's subjective. I think that from an educator's point, I'm a teacher. From an educator point of view, I think that the system who is at the power is consciously destroying what education is. It's not that children don't have a good experience, children are resilient, they're going to learn what's offered. But what I see is that there's not really